I hope I'm surprised by what comes next. I hope I have some new little discovery here and some little revelation there, and it brings something new to it. It adds another layer. No artist ever considers themselves perfect. It's that thing where they're always stretching, they're always trying to pull up from within themselves this thing that they can experience, which always comes out, according to the artist, imperfectly. The journey that you're on is about accepting the discomfort of feeling those inadequacies in what you're doing and keeping going regardless.
This is the first secret that professional artists know. There's no such thing as perfect. But that doesn't stop our relentless pursuit. We're all chasing that elusive ingredient that will transform our work from mediocre to magical. When it comes to magical illustrations, Mitchell Toy is a master. In this presentation, he generously shares his wisdom and knowledge from coming up with ideas, using models, creating glowing colors, digital painting tips, finding your own style, and much, much more.
Are we ready to go?
Oh, look, I think we're ready to go, except to thank you very much for having me and for everyone to joining.
Yeah, thank you.
We can jump in if you like.
All right, let's go.
I'm focusing on colour and colour in context in this session, and to go through a few of the things that I keep in mind when I'm making illustrations to do with colour. Everyone does these things their own way. This is just the sort of the ad hoc way that I've developed for doing it myself. Other artists will do it probably very differently to this, but this is what's going on in my head when I'm developing illustrations and thinking about colour. And to get started about that, take a look at this. You might want to move your face back from the computer screen a meter or so to have a look. I found this image on the internet a couple of years ago, and it's blown my mind ever since. And I show this to people. I say, well, what colours can you see in this image? You can probably see dark blue stripes. There's lighter colour blue. There's pink in there. You might also see some green. You might see some yellow. Often people say they see yellow in the picture, but not a shadow of a lie. There's no yellow. There's not a skerrick of yellow. There's not a skerrick of green in the picture. I'll show you what's going on here if you move in. It's because the background bars in this, what's effectively a color illusion, change from blue to black. And so your brain effectively tricks you into thinking that there is a color there in the lighter part of the stripes that isn't. I can't explain why such a thing happens, but it makes you realize that it's as much about the colors that aren't there that are being perceived as the ones that are there. In this picture, there's only 5 colors. There's white, black, blue, a lighter color blue, and just that one shade of pink. But if they're arranged in a certain way, then you see more. There's more to the picture, just these 5 colors, than is actually on the canvas or actually in the digital image. Doesn't it blow your mind? It blew my mind, absolutely. And it made me start to think about these things a little more deeply. To use a real world example of this is one of the illustrations which is in a book that I released last year called Bear, which is effectively about the friendship between the little girl and the bear. And the colors in this, there's a lot of warm colors. There's an overwhelming golden yellow from the sunlight coming through the window, tending to oranges and reds in the bear itself. But you might also say that there's blue in the sky. There's a bit of blue in the top that the little girl's wearing, in the small painting of that little dragon thing in the background. And there's some greens also, especially in the walls in the kitchen around the back. If you use a program, a digital program, to sample that color out, or you replicate it if you're using hard copy, there's not a skerrick of blue in that. It's fascinating how your mind will just react to this and see colors that aren't necessarily there. And naturally, if you can leverage it, and if you learn to use it well, you can get some great effects. Similarly, taking that the blue top that the girl's wearing, no blue, it's green. It's a desaturated grayish sort of green, but all of the yellow around it makes it seem blue. Same with the sky, actually. There's no blue in that sky. It's a desaturated green. If, for example, you were to take the true local color of that piece of clothing, that real blue as it would appear in your hand if you were holding such a thing, if it existed, and you put that color in, this is what it looks like. You see that stark blue there. And to me, it's too much. I mean, if you were really trying to highlight, create some strong contrast and draw the viewer's eye to that thing in particular, you may want to do that. Or if it were a particularly incandescent type of clothing, you might want to do that. But to put true blue in there seems too blue. It's that desaturated greeny blue that seems like the true blue. Isn't that strange? This is generally how I think about this and get this going in illustrations. And this sort of has come with a bit of practice, but also watching what other artists do and listening to what they do, and is also a part of my style and just the way that I do it. And there's probably numerous other ways to do it, but this is generally what I consider when I'm building a scene such as this, and the way that colors change based on the surrounding colors and the surrounding light. And this usually has to do with the color of the light impacting the local color of an object. So say we've got this little room here, and there's the lamp in the corner and a ball, and we want that ball to be quite a stark green. And as usual, we want the lamp to be a sort of goldeny, warm, orange yellow sort of thing. Now, the one thing you could do to start is you could just sample out the color of the lamp, the sort of the middle color that's there, or one of the brighter ones, and then just sort of apply it to the ball, which is a basic way of doing it. That works okay, especially if you blend it in. And of course, it depends on the texture of the ball as well. I'm pretending that this is sort of a matte, sort of a not particularly shiny type of ball, like similar to maybe one of those exercise balls that people like to sit on at their desks. To get a better result, though, I started to think, well, what if you actually you got this color wheel up, and what if you actually sort of approximated the color of the ball in the green and the color of the lamp in the orange and picked something that was directly halfway between? Then maybe that would make an actual blend of the two colors coming together, and that might be a better sort of way to get the true way that the color would appear. But if you do that, it doesn't, to me, look exactly right. The color seems too saturated and a bit too, and as if it's emitting light rather than absorbing it. Then I started thinking, well, and this is a trick that I've sort of picked up from other artists and tried it out myself. What I tend to do here is I'll find the 2 points of the colors, the light and the object that's being affected, and I'll draw an arc like this. This is where it tends towards the desaturation point of white in the middle. Then I will find the point that is halfway between those. The color of the light and the color of the local object that's being affected, this bow happens on the color wheel where it comes in towards the desaturation point. It's in somewhere in that area, and then it'll go out. I also then dark it down a fair bit. And you get a result that looks more like that. It's certainly more muted. I've darkened it down a little, as you can see. But to me, it seems a bit more natural than that one or that one. But I don't think you can really appreciate that until you start playing with the other side of the ball as well. If you replicate this process with, say, a cooler coloured light, I would like to, if this were a scene that I were rendering out, I'd like to put in a different light source, a cooler light source. So let's imagine that over on the right-hand side, there's a window with some moonlight coming through with some blue light, and you can replicate that process and get that same duller, a bit more desaturated color coming through the other side. Then you can get an idea of how this starts to look a bit more fleshed out and a little bit more realistic. That's the way that I go about it. That's sort of the technique, that idea of approximating that color. I do it now often without thinking, but it's something that you might want to play around with. This is an illustration from my latest book, which is the Midnight Tram sequel. This is sort of the fairies that live in the garden. There's these discarded toys and objects down there. And here we've got these warmer lights coming from these glowing fairies and this cooler light coming from these glowing flowers. This Rubik's Cube, or this puzzle cube that's sort of sitting in the foreground here, you can see how those cooler lights are affecting, and this is using that same process of desaturating a little, finding that middle color, and then playing around with it a bit to see how the light affects it. Same with the blue. There's a blue on the left side and a blue on the top. The blue on the top is comes into its own, is affected by that bluer light. And on the other side, comes out a little more purple, a bit dark, but more desaturated. So this is a matter really just playing around with it and having a crack and seeing what you come up with. This way of thinking and this way of sort of doing it has taken me years, obviously, to arrive at, and will obviously keep developing for years to come. I don't think you're ever really settled in your way of doing things or thinking about colours. So all of that is reasonably complex. And if there are any beginners in the group, let's look at something a bit more basic when thinking about colour. Bring this right back to the start when we're thinking about colour, and that's with the colour. Everyone's seen this. Everyone knows what this is. You can show this to a group of teenagers, as I sometimes do. It's a youth group that I help run at my local church, and pick up some basic tips about how to use colours. Of course, the first way, whether you're picking out an outfit or whether you're picking colours for your composition, take the direct opposite in what is often referred to as a complementary colour pairing, and you can't go very wrong. God knows why this happens. I'm not entirely sure, but these colours that appear opposite on the wheel tend to work really well together. These oranges and blues, it's interesting to keep a lookout. Even if you're at your local shopping centre or on a bus or wherever, looking at logos or advertisements or depictions of any kind, the way that these colours are paired together, you won't stop seeing these two, the oranges and the blues. It's so common to pair them together. It's got that sort of earthy feel to it. This was a painting that I did of a friend's dog just before Christmas. And you see how it can just work if you're using these reddy yellows in the foreground. Then the greeny blues in the background tend to work really well. If you put something different in the background, it wouldn't look as good and you wouldn't quite know why. This is the great mystery of colour theory, I think. Though one of the explanations could be, and this is a painting from Joaquin Sorolla, which is 1905. He's one of my favourite landscape artists. These two colours sometimes, or quite often I should say, appear together in nature quite strikingly. That Mediterranean blue of the water and these reddy yellows, earthen colours in the shore. There is something perhaps within us that some long-lost memory of these colours being paired together, which resonates really well. Similar with this purple and the yellow opposite on the colour wheel. You won't stop seeing these colours paired together so often. It calls up this regal feeling with the gold and the purple being really regal. There's brands, particularly like Thai Royal Silk, Hallmark, Cadbury. The Lakers, I don't know whether it's more a luxury brand or not. I'm not sure. I don't follow basketball. But again, you do see them paired together in nature, and in the Impressionists, that purpley blue and that yellow paired together is so striking. And even if your lines aren't so distinct and the rest of your style is somewhat underdeveloped, if you pair the colours together well, it can really make a striking composition. These two, this tealy sort of aqua and this pinkish sort of red, is found together often in toy design, I find. There's several toys in my niece's toy box that have these colours together. It's also common in interior design, product design, and in logo design as well. And of course, it's used in classical art as well to striking effect. This is an Impressionist painting. You don't have to just pick these opposite complementary colours. And again, this is very basic. The professional artists in this group will have seen this a million times before. You can always do what's called triadic, picking these colours, effectively a triangle, ending up with something like that, which is groovy 90s, often paired together. This one, you see guaranteed every year before Halloween. They'll roll out the sort of yellow, orangey, purpley, green. which is so pleasing to the eye paired together. Something like that as well. Then you can do one of my favorites is this thing that's called split complementary, where you find the two opposite colors, and instead of using the opposite, you pick two colors either side of one of them. That works as well in something like that. Or tetradic, or quadratic, or tetradic. I forget what it's called, where you effectively just pick a square. But again, this is just a matter of no matter how many rules that are put around color theory, and no matter how many methods that are developed or ideas that people have, the thing about colors going together and feeling good and looking good is so subjective and also so mysterious. But there is no wrong way of doing it. I think in a way it's a shame that we have this tendency to put these rules around how to pick colors, how to use it, when everyone's interpretation is different, everyone's view of these things is different. It's about working up what's right for you. However, if you are looking for a starting point, this is a really good one. And it's one that I'd recommend. And you can use it for, like I said, for picking outfits as well as you can for making paintings or illustrations. That's an example of the quadratic color pairing. I quite like that combination. So that's more or less it. I can leave it just there. And there were some questions, that, Dina, that came through early, and there might be some more now. Would you like me to get into some of that?
Yeah, absolutely. That would be fantastic.
Here we are. One question is, do I use a base layer or an underpainting in my work? For example, yellow all over to unite the image, or sketching everything only in red? Yeah, I absolutely do. And I don't think it matters whether you're doing digital illustration or hard copy illustration. If I'm doing a painting in hard copy, I'll always put down a wash. And it will generally be, if the picture is going to be overwhelmingly warm, I'll use a cooler color, and the opposite. If it's going to be a cool, I'll use some warm. With digital as well, yes, I'll sort of pick a base color using that same principle, and I'll just fill a whole layer on that and illustrate over it. It's very rare that I would illustrate something up from just a blank white thing.
So on an illustration like this one with the bear, you're saying you put a base color that's cool and then add your warm colors on top of it. Yes.
I can't remember quite what the color was. It was probably something like a navy blue, maybe.
Interesting.
But I doubt that much of that will actually come through in the final. It's been gone over so much, but I think it's not just for the final product. Often it's also just to help your thinking along the way and to provide that base for working on.
Okay, great.
This is actually my vicar. The vicar at my church is so obsessed with Star Wars. He called his dog Obi after Obi-Wan Kenobi. Can you believe that? But you can see in the background here, this was done with gouache, which is a watercolor of sorts, but it's opaque. I think it's actually like a milk protein base to paint like that. And you can see in the background there that you can see those little bits of orangey yellow poking through. There was a yellow wash underneath that background, and then I put the blue over the top. You could have done that just with a stark blue background if that's what you're looking for. I think though it just comes down to style. I like the idea of this sort of dappled color. This idea that it's a little bit yin and yang to me. That it's mostly cool in the background, but there are these little bits of warm poking through. And then if you have this warm foreground, it's almost the opposite. It's mostly warm, but there's these little bits of cool that'll poke through in the shadows. And again, it does something, and it's part of the mysterious way that art says something to people, that resonates with people. There's so many different ways that it does. It's like the color theory thing. We don't necessarily understand why we like it. We just sort of do. And in this case, I like doing it that way, but it's up to it's up to each artist to find their own way. Do I use a mood board? I haven't used a mood board. Perhaps I would use a mood board of sorts, which is if I ever see anything that's interesting, either on Instagram or out about in the world, I'll keep it in a folder on my phone. I've got a whole folder full of paintings, older paintings that I've seen here and there that I really like. And if I see things out and about that will be an inspiration to my stories or pictures, I'll keep them on hand and I'll refer back to them and sort of refresh my mind on those things.
Do you ever feel like you're stuck or blocked on anything? And do you find that it helps you to have this collection?
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. Well, we have such a tendency. I mean, inspiration will strike hard, but it will go just as quickly. We have such this strong disposition to just forget it. And if you have ideas for stories and you don't write them down, they'll walk on by and you'll forget. And I think it's similar with visual things that you can hold it in your mind for an instant, but then it will often be so fleeting and it will go. It's better to cage it up somehow and to be able to refer back to it and to get back into that moment and to see it. Yeah. And that does help with the block. The block is definitely real. And you mentioned sort of fluctuation in style earlier. I think everyone fluctuates in style. I certainly do. I certainly feel like I do anyway. And finding that style is a consistent style is often the one that you often end up sitting on one that you didn't think you wanted.
Yeah.
When I started illustrating, I wanted to be like Graham Bass, who's another Australian illustrator, or a bit more like Sean Tan, or a bit more like this, that, the other. And in attempting to sort of become those things, I ended up illustrating in this particular way and thinking that, no, it's not enough like those other artists until I started realizing, no, this is just how I'm doing it. This is how I'm doing it. And other people started saying, oh, I wish I could illustrate like you're illustrating. I said, no, don't do that. I'm trying to illustrate like other people. Like, what do you? So it's funny how you perceive your own illustrations sometimes.
That's exactly the same thing that happened to me when I did my first children's book. I was so set on illustrating in the style of my favorite illustrator, who's Trina Short Hyman. And I tried very hard for a while to make my art look like hers, but I failed dismally. And I had to just, reconcile myself with the fact that I'm just going to have to develop a style of my own, even though, I guess we keep evolving. It's still not where I'd like it to be. But yeah, it's funny how we do that.
Yeah, it is funny. It is funny, isn't it? Yeah. But it ends up being totally you, what you come out with.
Yeah.
Even if you don't realize it. Yeah. Do I use only certain colors over and over? I would say yes, especially if you're illustrating a book that you want to be reasonably consistent. I will keep a palette of the same colors digitally, and I'll reuse them. In fact, there was because I wrote a book that was a sequel to another one, I pulled out the same palette from the original so that the colors would be consistent. That is, if you're going to be illustrating pictures that are in a similar sort of context every time. For example, that Midnight Tram book, all the colours are at night time because it's at midnight and it's quite a nocturnal thing. And so you want the colours of the moon and the stars and the night sky, which appear quite a few times throughout the book. You want it to be consistent, so it pays to keep track of where your colours are, so it doesn't jar. So that's sort of an example of where I'd use the same colours again and again. I'm not sure whether the same colours pop up across my different illustrations, though they probably do. I think I tend to use an ultramarine blue quite a bit, and I tend to use this sort of yellowy orange a fair bit, and especially when I'm illustrating lights, glowing lights, which I like to do a lot. I'm using the same oranges and reds and yellows. So yeah, I think that's definitely a thing.
Yeah.
Did you have any thoughts on that, Dina?
Yeah, I tend to, well, I still work traditionally, but I tend to use the same colors over and over again. Like on my watercolor palette is like some of the colors are hardly touched, and some of them I just have to keep refilling because I just tend to use them over and over.
That's an interesting way of keeping track on it, and I think that's something you lose using digital art. You never know how much of which colors you're using, but if it's coming out of a tube, it's it becomes pretty clear. That's really interesting. How do I decide where to repeat a particular color to tie the image together and guide the eye where I want it to go? That's an interesting question. It's funny pointing out that the same color top. Yeah, not even I was conscious of that, honestly. I'm sort of just noticing that now. I would say, yeah, that process, as you might suggest, may be a subconscious one, where you're working in the illustration and the way that the eye is guided in the finished product is guided by some unknown force of the subconscious. So there are some things that you sort of just get down to second nature.
Yeah, and you don't even know where they came from. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe.
How do you plan an image like this? Color wise and layout and
yeah. Funnily enough, the way that I plan pictures is actually informed by my time at working at the newspaper, where I would often work very closely with news photographers, and they'd always be trying to frame things up and out on stories or on locations, and I'd be sort of seeing in real time how they were trying to do it. And they had an excellent eye for light and for framing things correctly, the human element and so forth. And so more than doing art classes, which I never really studied art except in like middle school. I didn't study it in high school. I did a little bit of art theory later on in when I was living in the UK. But aside from that, sort of it was just practice and a passion for it that allowed it to develop for me. You do think about things like, I do think about things like you mentioned, where do you want the focal point to be? And it is often what's the brightest color, or what's the where the light is, what's glowing, or if it's a bright picture, then where the darkest points are. But beyond that, like you suggest, it's accumulation of one's experience in either how they've been trained or how they have seen other people do it, and over and over again, that repetition builds up that second nature of how to plan the pictures. But like I say, my way of doing it is rooted in watching photographers is probably the best answer I can give.
Amazing. Okay, so there's a couple questions here put in the chat, so I'll do one at a time. Do you look at Edward Hopper as a source of inspiration?
Yeah, Hopper's wonderful. Hopper, for those who are unfamiliar, is I think Nighthawks was the most famous painting that Hopper did. He was early 20th century, I think. It was sort of 20s, 30s. Whoever asked the question will probably know better than me, but the answer is, yeah, I like Hopper. Yeah. I was just the other night discussing Hopper with a friend of mine who is not an artist, and she had a Hopper painting as the lock screen on her phone. And so he's still popular. He still evokes something that people like. I also like Vettriano, who is more pastiche. I don't know if you've ever heard of Jack Vettriano, but is a Scottish artist. I think his real name's Jack Hoggan, and you'll know his paintings if you Google it. The critics hate him because he's very popular and he's got quite a populist style. But a lot of the early paintings that I was doing were inspired by Hopper and also by Jack Vettriano. Yeah,
that's interesting that he mentioned Edward Hopper. I guess he sees some similarity.
Yeah, maybe.
Okay, and then the second question is, do you sketch on paper before you do a complex scene?
Oh, yeah. I'll sometimes do thumbnails on paper. Then I will pretty much set out the parameters of the document in Procreate digitally and work it up from there. I'll do a new sketch then on the iPad and then just keep building up that same thing until it's done. So it's a little bit of both, but I would say it's mostly digital. I have seen some great results by people who will do hard copy sketches and keep a lot of the texture that was in the sketch and even the paper texture and so forth. They bring that into the digital process and it works really well. So there's lots of different ways of doing it. Look, I think the secret with digital art is don't think you're going to use it as a time-saving process. Put as much time into it as you would a hard copy.
Nice. I like that. Yeah. I like
that. Really, the texture, for example, that you would see in this bear illustration, this is using the default 6B pencil brush that comes with Procreate. There's no fancy extra brushes. There's nothing really there. You will get those the layered color and the textures there if you just put in the same amount of time as if you were doing it in hard copy. Then it just becomes a matter of the digital process is, for me, the reason I like it the most is it's convenient and it's mobile. I can take the work anywhere I want to go. I'm not tied to a desk at home or to a studio. You're not dealing with paints and changing clothes every time you want to paint and so forth, which I used to do. But you have to treat it the same as hard copy and put the time in, and don't think that you can get the bucket tool out and then put color down and that will come across the same as traditional art. Unless, of course, you want that. And that's the other thing. There's so many different styles and there's so many different ways of doing things. But for me, I like to treat the illustration on the iPad as if it were hard copy and put in lots of time. And that's what does it.
Yeah, it's beautiful. How long does something like this take you? Do you time yourself?
Yeah, you can sort of play. Another good thing about digital, it will tell you how much time you've spent on it and so forth. But then there's plenty of other times when you're thinking about it. An illustration like this, though, I'd probably 4 days maybe.
Amazing.
That's
spending a lot of time. That's very involved. That's time consuming.
Yeah, but interestingly enough, for this book, there was a lot more extra time put in because I used maquettes as well. I mocked these up using models to get the light just right.
Ah, did you? Wow.
Yeah. So this was a 30 centimeter tall little model. And the bear was just a piece of brown felt sort of thing. It was very imprecise. But,
so you built the actual scene, like the room,
yeah,
with the window.
Yeah, more or less. I mean, it was a lot rougher than it looks in the finished product, but it helps a lot to get the light, especially. Often I'll just use imagination and I'll just use some, get the perspective lines going and use reference materials. I find though using the models, it gets the light sort of quite spot on. You can get some great results.
That's amazing.
But bring it alive. I mean, to imagine, for example, in that scene that the light as it hits the wall behind the bear and as it's coming in through the kitchen in the background, it's too much for your imagination to cope with.
Yeah.
You can come up with an approximation. You can imagine the broad scene and how you would want it to sort of look, but building those little models and having the light come in, and so forth, really it takes it up a notch. I don't always do it for that illustration I showed earlier for the Midnight Tram. I'll use my imagination, and it will come as a result. It will come across in a way that's a bit more cartoony and a bit more fun. But this was a sort of a more serious story to this book, and it lent itself to this process. So there are things you keep in mind as well. There is a wonderful, if you're looking for a bit more depth to building the maquettes and the models, take a look at James Gurney, who is the American artist and author who did Dinotopia, which many of you will know. He did a book called Imaginative Realism, which goes through that whole process, that and other methods to get things that look real that sort of aren't there. So I recommend that highly, Imaginative Realism. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, I have one of his books, but maybe I'll have to get a hold of that one. It's amazing. Naomi wants to know, are there any resources you can recommend for getting started on Procreate?
Ooh, I don't remember using any myself, but they run a really good social media platform. If you're on Instagram or YouTube, they're great at running tutorials direct from Procreate, which will get you up to speed really fast. It's a very intuitive program to use. It's very inexpensive. You pay for it once. It's not subscription. I love this thing so much. And of course, Tasmanians are great people. The thing that will set you back in that process is the hardware. Getting the iPad Pro is the most expensive part. But I'm pleased to say that I've been using mine for 5 years. It's still running just as well today as it was the first day I got it. I've illustrated 6 books on it, sort of 6.5. It's still running great. I haven't so much as replaced the tip of the stylus. It runs really well, and it proves that Apple can make lasting products when they really want to. So it's worked really well for me, and I recommend it. But Procreate themselves, they're great at making resources, and I reckon that's the best place to find them.
Nice. Thanks. Okay, question from Gary is, do you try out different versions of the same image, like different light sources or times of day?
Yeah. I'll often, when I'm sort of in the sketching phase, I'll lay down some rough sort of lines. Then I'll work in sort of broad, I'll work with the light first. I'll try and see where the light goes, because to me that sort of affects how it affects everything else in the picture, I would say. So I'll go through that process. Sometimes you get it spot on the first time, or you get what you want the first time. That might happen sometimes, and then other times I'll wrestle with the thing for days, sketching up different versions, different perspectives, different sources of light, trying to get what's in your mind's eye, which can sometimes be blurry and nebulous, and to get it out is a difficult thing. I find this process is a bit like scuba diving. There's the creative process is sort of like there's these things on the surface, like the boat and the air, which is like your normal life, and doing the dishes and paying taxes in the real world, and so forth. And you go down into this sort of this underwater thing where you're finding these ideas. You're getting down there into your own mind for your own experiences, your own ideas, your own inspiration. The deeper down you go, the better things you find down there that can be absolutely amazing. Then there's this real challenge, and it's the process of creating the art, is taking those things down there and pulling them up to the surface so that other people can appreciate them. That's hard. That's that process of trying to get what's down within you that you can experience because it's within you, and trying to express it so that other people can experience it in not the same way maybe, but in a pretty similar way. And you find that when you're sketching things out, you do one version of it, one version of a sketch, or even one version of a whole picture, and you just think, that's just not what was down there. I brought it up wrong. And you've got to do it again. Every time I do a book, there's usually 2 full-color illustrations, full-page illustrations, I should say, double page, that I've spent a week on each, and I just chuck them out and do them again. And often that's the only way, because you just think, look, other people might like them, but it's like, it's not what was down there. I've brought up the wrong thing, or I've brought it up wrong. It's like raising a shipwreck. It hasn't really worked. I'll do it again, and I'll give it another shot. So yeah, it definitely happens. Yeah. Gary, what are your experiences on that?
Well, yeah, I get there's like this little inner voice that says, like, this is going, don't you? No, I'll keep working on it. It'll be all right. No, it's no good. It's gone past the point where you can't save it. It's got to.
Yeah.
I wasn't so much asking about the one with the bear, because I know you've explained about using the models and the light sources with that, but there were other ones we were looking at, and say it looks so complex. And the way you had that light on that Rubik's Cube, and I particularly like the light on the old tape. Like, how do you arrive at that? It's so complex. Yeah, brilliant. Really. This is a good example of those color combinations you were talking about as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, thanks, Gary. That's very kind. Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It never tumbles out the first time. Obviously, there's lots of practice to it, but also in any single illustration, it takes a lot of time to zone out the colors, I suppose, to figure out, it's like, oh, there's going to be this light over here, this blue light over here, this warm light over here. And it is going through that process of sketching and resketching and sketching and resketching and until you find what works. I do agree, though, that feeling that you get where it sort of just slots in and you think, that's it. It's the best thing ever. It's good. It's good when you get that. Yeah.
Amazing. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.
Thanks, Gary. Sometimes, like, there's some pretty cheap and dirty methods you can use. This, for example, the way that I got the lines right on this building, this station here, because I couldn't get up and look at it and take a photo, so I just used Google Earth, which you might be familiar with, which 3D renders a lot of cities. You can get a screenshot of that to get the lines right, and then you can add in the light and the color and the extra bits around it. So I'll do stuff like that all the time, working with, as you said, real photographs of places, using those photographs, dropping them often directly into Procreate and then adding in characters, extra elements, changing the buildings up once you can sort of get perspective lines over as well. Yeah. But stuff like, I mean, for the tram, I've got a little model tram that I use, and you can combine those things, a little model and some photos of buildings. And obviously in this picture, there's a lot that's not real about it as well. The foreground, none of it's real. The crowd of people, the lanterns and so forth. So it's a real blend of those things, I think. Observing models, observing real places, using photo reference material, and then just throwing your imagination around a lot.
It's fascinating. You have all these different stories in there, like in the tram and the foreground, the people, and the boy on the balcony over there, and then another boy looking over the January 1st. It's like you just keep the stories. Everywhere you have so many stories within one picture.
Yeah, thanks for that. And children love it. Connecting little things. There are even stories you can connect between books that the children will notice. In this picture that I showed of the fairy garden thing here, you'll notice there's a little sign in the background that's like this weird kind of language, right? That was from another book. I did a book called Wizard & Co., which was about a department store. And at the end, there was like a little code, like the wizard's language, that you could go back and figure things out, as an extra sort of puzzle. And I thought, well, why not just bring that in and use it in this new book and see if anyone notices? Because the fairies might use the same sort of language. And no one mentioned it until I went to a sort of a book reading in Melbourne just before Christmas. And sure enough, there's this boy who's seen it, and he said, yeah, that's the language from Wizard & Co. I can go and check the code in the other book and then find out in this book what all the signs say here. They love going that deep, and the deeper you make it, the deeper they'll go.
I do the same. When I actually look at children's books and I see something, I go, wait a minute, wasn't that the window higher? And I go back, to see, you catch that, but you have to think like the children. They're very curious, and they want to catch you, and they do catch you.
Oh, yeah. It cuts both ways. If you ever do anything that's inconsistent with the sort of the universe that you made, or you do something that's not quite right, they'll know that as well, and they'll pull you up on it. They'll let you know that's not right. What are you doing that for? Shouldn't be like that. So they live in a different world, really, to adults.
Yeah, we should go back there. It's a fun world.
Yeah, fair dinkum, we should. Yeah, we really should. Yeah, absolutely. It's great. It is. It's
we get to, as artists, we get to, which is great, like as artists, we get to tap in there, and as parents, we get to tap in there. And
yes. Fascinating. Yeah, it's fascinating, really.
I noticed how this is not really a question, more of an observation, but often, like I noticed in the bear illustration and a little bit in this one, and then in the first one with the kids on the balcony, that you use like the foreground. You always have a little corner there.
Oh yeah,
the table with the bottle and everything, and then you've got the midground with your main characters, and then you have like in the background the mom is there, like a really nice way of tying everything together. And
thanks for that. There's probably two things that I'm definitely aware of that. I'm very conscious of the foreground, especially. The main thing that influenced that was Graham Bass, who's another Australian author illustrator who wrote Animalia, The 11th Hour, other such books. I grew up reading those books, and he does a similar thing. I was always fascinated by it. He's got all of that detail in there as well that I draw on. It's the foreground, background objects, making things big in the foreground, so you can get this sort of hyper detail, like in the fairy one as well. There's the old cassette and so forth,
right?
And then moving right back into the background where you can have these figures and have things going on there. You can get something as small as a marble. You can see the detail in that.
Yeah.
Then also there's things off in the distance that draw you back there as well. Graham Bass was a big inspiration for that to me. But also, when I did study a bit of art theory, a lot of the Dutch masters like Vermeer and Van Eyck have that thing where they use the background really well. They use the space moving back. And so I think I picked a bit of that up from there as well.
Interesting. For our last question here is that I feel like creating art, no matter how accomplished you are, you always feel like there's more that you want to do, or something else you want to learn, or something maybe you're still struggling with. And I find that like the greatest artists are still trying to learn new things and experiment with maybe a different style or something. So I'm curious to know if there's anything that you still feel like you're working on, or anything that comes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it never stops. I'd love to. I'll obviously keep going with book illustration, doing this sort of style, and it develops all the time. Okay. I think a big challenge too is not letting it, not sort of getting, trying to get the best out of yourself all the time, not getting so comfortable in a style that you're sort of doing stuff that's too similar all the time. I find that a bit of a challenge. I'd love to get back into some oil painting as well, because I quite enjoy that, and I haven't done it in a long time. And I'm fearful for how the neglect of that might affect how well I do that. It's a bit like playing the piano, I think. It's like if you don't do it for years, then you come back, and some things come back, and it's sort of muscle memory, but it takes a bit of time to get back into it. And I think that would be the case. But as you say, it never stops. I hope I'm surprised by what comes next. I hope I have some new little discovery here and some little revelation there, and it brings something new to it. It adds another layer and builds it up gradually so it can keep going. It's a great path to be on, and artists know that. I think it's so true that there's, as we were saying earlier, you can look at other artists and just say, isn't that wonderful? Like, your work is so perfect, so good. No artist ever considers themselves perfect. It's that thing where they're always stretching, they're always trying to pull up from within themselves this thing that they can experience, which always comes out, according to the artist, imperfectly. And they always feel as if they haven't not quite adequately expressed what they wanted to do. That's what I think it is anyway.
Yeah.
There's no perfect, there are no perfect artists. Even the ones that you think are perfect, you ask them and they're like, no, they've got the same problems. They're just like, nah, I didn't want it like that. I wanted it like this.
Yeah.
Even Caravaggio, he killed a guy. I mean, there's no perfect artist. There's no perfect way of doing it. And I think the journey that you're on is about accepting the discomfort of feeling those inadequacies in what you're doing and keeping going regardless. Is what it's about.
Yeah, well, that's very well said. I would agree with that. All right.
I have one more question. Do you put any reels or videos of your work process?
Yeah, I do that now and then on Instagram. Procreate is really good at doing the playback thing. Crunch it down to 30 seconds and it all comes out. And that can be really interesting sometimes, but also too, is I think I'm reluctant to post those things because I will start drawing one thing and then sort of go back and draw over it. And I will think that the process is too messy to show. Oh, no, that's too scrappy. I can't show that. I'll just show the finished thing instead.
We all think like that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And they're the most helpful processes to see, but they don't get posted very often for the same reasons that I wouldn't post. So I'd sort of just think, oh, no, I'll find one that's really clean and that sort of, looks good. I'll post that instead.
Thank you. So, Mitchell, I really appreciate it. That was incredible and it was fascinating to learn more about.
Thank you.
You and your art, and I really, really appreciate that.
Thanks very much, Dina. Thanks for inviting me on. It's been a great pleasure for me, and it's great to get different perspectives, different experiences. I've loved following your art on Instagram, and it's great to see that you're going ahead with where these sorts of discussions can happen more frequently. It's a bold thing to do. It's a great thing to do. So well done.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
Don't miss the first part of this interview, where Mitchell talks about the importance of storytelling, how he came to be a children's book author and illustrator, and why he chooses to self-publish his books. You can buy his books at mitchelltoy.com and follow him on Facebook and Instagram. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe for more amazing artist interviews like this one.